How much does China still need Hong Kong in its current embodiment? The Beijing-backed authority in that former British colony, unmoved by the sea of humanity in the streets Sunday to protest a bill that effectively allows the extradition to the mainland of political prisoners. Hong Kong, due to keep its one country, two systems status until the year 2047. But displays like this one are exactly what Xi Jinping doesn't like. And activists accuse China's most powerful leader since Mao of moving the clock forward. Those activists worry that the spectacular rise of nearby Shanghai and Shenzhen means that Beijing no longer needs a window to the outside world. With its separate currency, its free press, its financial center and trade hub status. Better off with one country, one system? How will the international community read the change? China's clout is such it's hardly been mentioned at the not far off G20 finance ministers meeting in Tokyo. But could foreign investors think twice before doing business in a country where an unprecedented tightening of the screws could potentially stymie dialogue with local trade partners and academics? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if we've just witnessed Hong Kong's last stand. And joining us from there, journalist Pablo Wong, who extensively covered the 2014 umbrella movement. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We also want to welcome the queen of cantopop, singer, producer, and activist Denise Ho is with us from Hong Kong. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
From London, former UK diplomat whose postings include Beijing and the Foreign Office's Hong Kong Bureau, Rod Wise, Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Thank you for being with us.
Nice to be here.
And here in the studio, human rights activist Nancy Lee is with us. Welcome back. And welcome to economist Rémi Bourgeot of the international relations think tank IRIS, the France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. 240,000 in the streets, say police. 1 million, say organizers. Proportional to Hong Kong's population here in France, that would be the equivalent of 9 million people in the streets. Well, let me just begin with you, Denise Ho. Describe for us your Sunday.
Yes, yesterday was a very emotional day for all Hong Kongers who were on the street, the 1 million people who came out. And the fact that it was a very difficult 4 years after the umbrella movement for us, and many young people have checked out, and we had a very low time in Hong Kong, and then for us to come back in such a huge mass and also in such a fashion, I was speechless among the crowds, and I saw elderlies, young families with toddlers on their shoulders, and all these young generations, even people younger from those who participated in the umbrella movement, were out on the streets. And that was a very amazing moment for me personally to witness.
Denise, I'm reading reports that people were backed up 12 metro stops. Describe for us just how crowded it was.
Yes, I was in the front of the line, so we started at 2:30, even though it was supposed to start at 3. But the police, because there were too many people, so they asked us to start the march earlier. And we arrived around at 4 to the end point, and people were just joining in continuously, and the whole march went on until 10 p.m. at night. And I heard that MTR stations were stuck, and then some of the trains, they passed the stations, they skipped the stations because there were too many people on all the stations, even on the Kowloon side, and then some people were taking the ferries to come on the Hong Kong side. So basically people were just determined to show to have a presence in this very historic moment in Hong Kong's democratic battle.
All right, the last protesters breaking up at 3 a.m. 19 arrests. There were some incidents towards the tail end. 358 questioned. Hong Kong police have defended their clearing of the area around the Legislative Council overnight. They point to paraphernalia that was displayed at a news conference, including goggles, sprays, cans, lighters, and knives.
Well, from my perspective, I think a lot of the chaos was caused mostly by the Hong Kong police, who came onto the sites around 11-ish, and the young people, many of them were still sitting on the streets and then on the grass. Besides the Legislative Council, and I didn't really see it happen, but the news said that some small crowds were putting up barricades, sorry, and but from what I personally saw on the live streams last night, from 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. The riot police came and they were very harsh on the people, even though nobody was using violence on them. They were still barging ahead with their shields and the shouting at the innocent people who were in front of them. And even at certain moments, even when the streets were empty and there were only reporters left, they were still barging on in the same very very harsh fashion. So I think that was something obviously prepared by the government because of what happened in the umbrella movement, and they probably, from my speculation, is that they were ready for any sort of protests, and they were just waiting for the moment to suppress anything, even
so
if
you're saying it's a provocation. Pablo Wong, what did you witness?
Well, I left the
well,
protest before. Sorry.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Pablo.
Denise. Okay. I left the protest before 11, before the police started clearing up the site. But I was following the live broadcast, and I was following also a lot of groups, internal groups with journalists in Hong Kong. And my perception of the events is that protesters who did not leave the premises, were actually very disappointed at the government's reaction to the protest yesterday. Of course, there will be debates about the actual number of participants, but regardless of the actual number of people who were on the streets, and my personal experience is that this was probably the most, I was in the protest yesterday, and this was probably one of the most the protests with most participants in Hong Kong that I've seen in the last 10 years. Okay, regardless of the number of the representation that this means, this law is controversial. This reform to the law for extraditing prisoners and fugitives in Hong Kong is controversial. And the government's response, Carrie Lam's response to the protest, was basically ignoring it. So my takeaway is that protesters on the site were extremely disappointed at the government's reaction. And that's why they thought that they should probably occupy the premises until Wednesday, when the Legislative Council will resume sessions debating this reform.
Because organizers had decided not to have a sit-in in the way there was with the umbrella movement back in 2014.
It's very difficult in Hong Kong to call on citizens, on Hong Kongers, to sit in and take over a site. So organizers wanted to voice their opinion, wanted to bring people to the street. And as Denise rightly pointed out, and I read one of the op-eds she wrote recently, and I do agree with her that this movement, and actually it was actually maybe unwittingly, the Hong Kong government has brought all the people back to the street, brought the people from their disappointment, from their lack of confidence in the ability to change things in Hong Kong, or to at least preserve things in Hong Kong. So this legislation, which, by the way, the excuse to reform the legislation is because there is this murder suspect from Hong Kong who allegedly committed murder in Taiwan, and Taiwan wanted to extradite this person to bring him to Taiwan to face the law. And Hong Kong government decided to change its legislation regarding extradition of fugitives. And the most important change that the Hong Kong government is proposing through the Legislative Council this time is to delete the part regarding which territories Hong Kong does not send suspects to. And this points precisely to mainland China, to the central government or any part of the People's Republic of China. This may be a little bit a broader topic, but the problem here is one country, two systems, and the one China principle. China, of course, claims that Taiwan is part of China, but the reality is that Taiwan and Hong Kong have signed agreements in the past avoiding to directly confront the fact of the one China principle. So this time Taiwan has clearly stated that any prisoner extradited to Taiwan under these conditions considering Taiwan as the same jurisdiction as the People's Republic of China, is unacceptable. So the excuse to actually reform the law has been rejected by Taiwan.
Rejected by Taiwan, and as Pablo was mentioning, the Beijing-backed Hong Kong authorities saying it's full speed ahead with that extradition law, which, as Pablo was saying, they insist it's only to close a legal loophole. Owen Barnell explains.
Just after midnight, police moved in. Protesters gathered for a sit-in near Hong Kong's waterfront were forced away from government buildings. Hundreds of them had planned to hold out until Wednesday, when a controversial extradition bill will go before Parliament for its second reading. But as legal permissions for Sunday's march expired, officers took their chance. What had been a peaceful march turned violent. Dozens were injured in the clashes that followed. And by Monday morning, Hong Kong's chief executive was determined amendments to the city's extradition laws would not be derailed.
The intensity of these 4 months is quite unprecedented. So I would say that while we will continue to do the communication and explanation, there is very little merit to be gained to delay the bill. It will just cause more anxiety and divisiveness in society.
Soon after, protest groups were sounding the alarm and calling for Carrie Lam to step down.
We just don't trust a thing in this issue. There's no trust, there's no confidence, and we still call on Carrie Lam to at least consider, if not scrapping the thing altogether, at least shelve it. Please, could you just shelve it and give Hong Kong some breathing space for the time being? Let's all have a rethink.
The proposed law would allow for suspects to be sent to mainland China and tried under the country's widely criticised judicial system. To critics, it's the final nail in the coffin for Hong Kong's legal independence, legitimising the abduction of residents by Beijing. To its advocates and Chinese authorities, the bill will allow for the legitimate right to request the transfer of alleged criminals.
First, the central government will continue to firmly support the Hong Kong government in amending the 2 articles. Second, we resolutely oppose any wrong words and actions by any foreign forces to interfere in the legislative matters of Hong Kong.
22 years after Hong Kong was returned from British rule, march organisers hope one of the largest protests this city has seen is a turning point in the battle for its future.
Rod Wai, what's going to be the impact of Sunday's massive protest?
What's going to be the impact? I think it demonstrates very clearly the strength of feeling in Hong Kong, the numbers of people who have dared to go out on the streets to show their disquiet at the actions of the government. And I think it is a clear sign that Hong Kongers are prepared to go to considerable lengths to defend the uniqueness of Hong Kong society, and they see this proposed bill as eroding that judicial independence, that particular uniqueness of the rule of law in Hong Kong. And of course, there is the deeper political aspect of the continuing suspicion of the mainland Chinese government's ultimate intentions towards Hong Kong, and the feeling that it is getting increasingly difficult for Hong Kong to preserve its unique identity. I think we will probably see the Hong Kong government press ahead regardless with this amendment to the law. I think that would be a mistake, but they are clearly unwilling to back down, and I think they are being supported by the Beijing government in that. And the words that have come from the official Chinese spokesman talking about foreign interference provoking these demonstrations shows clearly where the Chinese government, or what the Chinese government thinks about these demonstrations, that they are improper. And that they should not have taken place.
Rod, when the handover of Hong Kong from the British happened in 1997, it was supposed to be this 50-year period for the special status. At the time, did you think it would somehow end sooner?
I think we're being a little bit premature in saying that this is the last gasp. I mean, a lot of the special status still remains, and a lot of the rule of law still remains. But Hong Kong has suffered huge disappointments in the sense that the process of political development has been stalled now for many years and is unlikely to go to progress towards democracy is unlikely to take place. And at the same time, there has been a creeping encroachment by the sort of feelings from that Chinese that China is encroaching on Hong Kong's freedoms and way of life in a way that it wasn't in the earlier days after 1997.
All right. Is it
we're still a long way to go before.
Is it the last gasp or not? We're going to put it to the rest of our panel. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking after what, according to the organizers, were 1 million people in the streets of Hong Kong, 1 in 7. And with us to talk about it, journalist Pablo Wong, who joins us from Hong Kong, as does singer and producer Denise Ho, known as the Queen of Canto Pop. It's late right now in Hong Kong, so thank you for staying with us here for the show at this late hour. Rod Y is with us as well, associate fellow at Chatham House, former British diplomat, and here in the studio we're with human rights activist Nancy Lee and economist Rémi Bourgeot. Nancy, just before the break, Rod was saying how it's premature to say it's the end of the special status.
It's very threatening, and
is it premature though?
I don't think it is premature. I think there's been a lot of warnings, all for the worse. We all know about perhaps you know about the kidnapping of the bookshop associates. 4 of them in a very short space, all were disappeared. And 2 when they were traveling in China, and 2 when they were outside of China. And somehow 2 of them turned up on Chinese television, repenting, apologizing for what they did wrong. And one pointedly told the Hong Kong people, the protest you're organizing today for me, that you should not do that. I'm condemning that. There's nothing wrong with me. His script was not written by an award-winning scriptwriter. He said, according to him, he said, I put myself through a smuggler's channel in order to go to China to help the police there to investigate something. So don't worry about me. That kind of thing. So there's still one person still missing among the 4. When this extradition amendment goes through, this kind of kidnapping is going to be legal. It's going to be institutionalized. That's what we're up against.
All right, and there's what's perhaps was a turning point. We've talked about political turning points with Xi Jinping tightening his grip on power in Beijing. But another turning point came last October with the opening of the 50-kilometer bridge that links the mainland to the territory in nearby Macau. Rémi Bourgeot, this tying up of Hong Kong to the mainland was seen as an important symbol last October.
Yeah, well, this overall political situation has huge implications in terms of Hong Kong's economic model as a financial center and trading hub for the region and on the global scale. It obviously relies very much on its judicial system and the rule of law in particular. So something that's been a bit downplayed, I mean, in some cases, but that's really the main thing to develop.
Could the extradition law scare away investors?
Yes, it could to some extent, but there's obviously the broader issue of the rule of law, the judicial system, the way it operates. And so far since 1997, things have been rather smooth in the sense that Hong Kong was able to integrate rather easily with China in that context of rapid globalization. But things have changed very fast more recently with those trade tensions between the US and China. So this rather obvious model that Hong Kong was following is really being challenged at this time. And with an evolving judicial system, an evolving link with mainland China, it could become less relevant also on the global stage and also on the regional stage, where it really has to develop a new role towards Southeast Asia and many countries to really reinvent itself in the context of those huge trade tensions.
Rod, why at the G20 finance meeting that was taking place in Tokyo this Monday, we heard the French finance minister urge China and the U.S. Not to have a trade war. We didn't hear any talk about Hong Kong. Is this something that, well, the international community will live with if there is the end of the one country, two systems?
I still don't agree that the one country, two systems is at an end. I fully accept that it is under threat, and I fully accept the bravery and constancy of the Hong Kong people in standing up for their rights and freedoms. But I think, as far as the G20 is concerned, they would say that this is not a matter for finance ministers. As far as the international community is concerned, Britain and Canada have already made a statement about their concern over this legislation and urging the Hong Kong government, as some of these speakers have already asked for to have more time to step back from this decision. But the Hong Kong government seem absolutely determined to press ahead with it, and as I said, I think this is
let me put the question to you.
An error of judgment.
Let me put the question to you a little bit differently, Rod. How much does Xi Jinping in 2019 still need Hong Kong with its special status, with the free press, with its own currency?
I think China would be very reluctant to see Hong Kong integrated now into China. I think Hong Kong, as the previous speaker was saying, the legal system, the guarantees that Hong Kong gives to international business in doing business with China through and in Hong Kong is very important still to China, because if they tore that down, I think there would be a real crisis of confidence, not just in relation to Hong Kong, but more widely in terms of doing any kind of business with China. And that is something that Xi Jinping desperately does not want. He wants China to be able to continue to do business with the outside world. I think there is also this question of the political response that the international community should be giving to these developments in Hong Kong. And I hope that there will be a stronger response. I suspect that it may well be muted because of China's economic power, but at the same time, it really is important to support the Hong Kong people in standing up for the rights and freedoms that they were guaranteed under the joint declaration.
Denise Ho, are you reassured by what Rod Wise is saying that, Xi Jinping needs Hong Kong with its current status?
Well, I totally agree with that because even though we have a small market comparatively, but Hong Kong is still the portal for China to go into the international market, and for international businesses to come into China, they still need Hong Kong. So yeah, but I am certainly not an expert on this issue, but that is my perspective.
Pablo Wong, is there
Yes.
a moment where things have changed irreversibly? Now, you heard earlier Nancy Lee mention the case of those booksellers who disappeared and reappeared suddenly in mainland China. What's been I guess you could say, the turning point under Xi Jinping?
Well, for people in Hong Kong, the turning point is precisely the event that Nancy rightly pointed out. I think the disappearance and posterior appearance of these booksellers in mainland China has changed the perception of people in Hong Kong regarding the promise of the central government to preserve one country, two systems until 2047. And there's also a lot of other symptoms. For instance, the attitude of the government towards the press. For instance, online media are not allowed into government press conferences because they are not considered official media, for instance. Me as a journalist, I'm quite concerned about these issues. And also the attitude of the police toward protesters have been changing in Hong Kong through the years. And also several government policies, for instance, in 2012, policy towards education, changing the curriculum of the students, secondary school students in Hong Kong. There have been several incidents, and I think the single turning point would be the Causeway Way bookstore incident that Nancy pointed out. So now people in Hong Kong are feeling that time is of an essence, time is pressing, and things are changing more towards post-2047 and not so much seeing one country, two systems being preserved as originally, and as Rod rightly pointed out, as originally promised in the Sino-British agreement.
In Beijing, officials have told foreign journalist Nancy Lee to, quote, inject positive energy into their coverage. This has a special significance, positive energy. What does that mean?
It means never to contradict the government's line. Journalists just don't take that very seriously. I mean, would you take it seriously if you were being told to do that in Beijing? You would, try not to laugh.
But what does that tell you, though, about the mood right now in Beijing when it comes to these issues of what that special status in Hong Kong represents?
But I think Rod points out rightly, the Beijing government still sees a relevancy in Hong Kong. It does not want Hong Kong to be integrated. That's exactly what Rod said. Right away into China. We have a problem of Hong Kong's leaders being overzealous. Carrie Lam decided to table this amendment of the extradition, and she cannot back down. It's now become a folie à deux between her and Xi Jinping and the Beijing government. Beijing government cannot lose face by saying, "Okay, we don't want that," and so they have. So the Hong Kong pro-Beijing camp is looking to Beijing, and it was not Beijing's idea, this whole thing. And this protest does give some pressure to Beijing, and that would give pressure to Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government does not make any of its decisions. It's looking on to Beijing for what to do.
Right. So this was zeal on the part of Carrie Lam.
Yes.
Hong Kong's economy relative to China as a whole, has fallen from a peak of 27% if you go way back to 1993, before the handover, to less than 3% in 2018. 2017. When you look at that chart there, Rémi Bourgeot, what are your thoughts on what's the value of Hong Kong today?
Well, it doesn't weigh much in terms of the GDP compared to mainland China, of course, but it's all about its financial and trading role for China. And as the other speakers said, it's absolutely key, and Beijing is absolutely not willing or eager to abandon that advantage it has to deal with the world through Hong Kong as a financial hub and trading hub. So that's really key to relationship between Beijing and Hong Kong. So obviously the situation is evolving at this moment. It's a very difficult time also for China in this context, in the context of global trade tensions, and Hong Kong has been key to its development, but also to many imbalances that have developed within the Chinese economy. Hong Kong has been really a key center of the foreign debts, especially that have been issued by Chinese private companies. This kind of bubble that has developed since the.
So it's as much Hong Kong
crisis.
as it is Shanghai, where the potential trouble could happen if there was a financial crisis?
Well, it's a different role, but really in terms of international financial connections, Hong Kong is really absolutely central for the Chinese economy, the way it deals with the rest of the world, and that also means that Hong Kong's role and economic model will have to evolve, given the overwhelming trend now in the global economy, talks of deglobalization. So that's really affecting Hong Kong quite seriously already. You can see that in GDP figures and many other indicators.
All right, the consolidation of power from the mainland, Denise Ho, that we've witnessed under Xi Jinping, unprecedented since the days of Mao. We are. It's also, and this is we're looking at a graph here about Taiwan, but maybe we'll talk about Taiwan a little bit later on. This consolidation of power from the mainland that we're seeing, it's also cultural. You sing in Cantonese. How is Cantonese doing these days?
Well, I mean, it is still going strong, and that is probably one of the reasons that the communist government, they cannot really demolish Hong Kong's culture, because comparatively with what is happening with Taiwan right now, they have all these cultural songs, TV shows that they can reach to Taiwanese youngsters. But on the other hand, with young people in Hong Kong, they cannot do the same thing, because we have our own language, and then we have our slangs and our own Hong Kong culture, which is really quite unique in the whole China perimeter, because we are this mix of East meets West, which does not exist anywhere else in China. So I think that is something that helps our battle in these very difficult times. And Hong Kong people are regaining their willpower after these 4 years of frustration and disappointment. And adding on to what Nancy said just now, that Carrie Lam and also the China government, they tried to push ahead this extradition bill. And on my perspective, I think it is because they probably thought that Hong Kong people has been exhausted, and then we have no more power in us to protest. But in fact, this has touched this bottom line for us in our autonomy, and also our freedom, and also our sense of security. So the fact that 1 million people came onto the streets, that was probably unexpected for the Hong Kong government also. So I know, realistically, I know that they probably won't budge, but I still hold on to this slight possibility of change that might happen in these following days.
Nancy Lee, you're outspoken. What kind of feedback do you get from listeners in southern China?
Okay, first of all, I want to add something about what Denise said about the situation of the Cantonese language in Hong Kong. I want to remind everybody, and especially Denise can back me up because she went to a British school. We were never told by the British to take patriotism lessons. I never even sang God Save the Queen. I was never forced to sing "God Save the Queen." I don't even know the words today. I know the beginning and the end, and that's about it. And now they're trying to, they impose patriotism lesson to children. They even try to impose Mandarin, and that causes a phenomenon of the linguistic and cultural consciousness about Cantonese. And
it has the opposite effect, is what
exactly. People are defending Cantonese.
So Denise Ho, let me ask you: do you get feedback from listeners in southern China to your music?
Well, I do have a lot of supporters in China, actually, and I have been getting support from them through, very ironically, through Instagram and Facebook, where supposedly they should not be able to get on, but they are finding ways, and that is something that I hold very precious because I think even though the Hong Kong government is not backing down yet, I think the statement that we made with all these people on the streets, that is an empowerment to other people, probably in Taiwan or even in mainland China, that they can get to the pictures and all the news, even though it's been censored in China itself. So I think whatever we can do at the moment, Hong Kongers should do it. And as I said previously, I think it is no longer a movement like the umbrella movement where we used one way to get to what we want. Instead, it is now a totally different picture and a totally different game where everyone should pitch in, like every normal people, not known as not celebrities or politicians, like everybody in Hong Kong. If you have something that you think might help to this fight, you should just do it, and to put it in a wider spectrum and to change the ways and to be very flexible. I think that is something that the Hong Kong government are not trained for,
must take into account. Pablo Wong, very briefly, because we're out of time, just talk us through, because the second reading of that bill is due on Wednesday. How do you foresee the next 48 hours?
Well, there's a lot of talk around social media in Hong Kong about general strike, about different modalities for protests or holding vigils and taking over the surrounding area of the government complex in Hong Kong. There's a lot of chatter on social media, but as Nancy and Denise were pointing out, I think Carrie Lam, Hong Kong's chief executive, has put herself in a difficult position because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program today, she tackled the issue directly head-on to one country, two systems, to sovereignty, and now it's very difficult for Beijing to not support her, because this is a matter of faith for Xi Jinping, especially in times where the economy is not doing
not doing as well.
China.
Pablo Wong, many thanks for joining us from Hong Kong. I want to thank as well Denise Ho, Nancy Lee.
Very proud of Hong Kong, I want to say.
Who's very proud, native of Hong Kong. Rod Y, many thanks for joining us from London. Rémi Bourgeot, stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. Quick look at how this has been covered online, or not, as the case may be. This is a piece in abacusnews.com about censorship of the Hong Kong protest in mainland China. Of course, less than a week after the 30th anniversary of the June 4th Tiananmen Square crackdown was also being censored. So censors are pretty busy in China at the moment. You can see here a screen grab of of Weibo, which is the most used social network, and WeChat accounts are also being suspended. But basically, if people do mention what's going on in Hong Kong, their accounts are very quickly, very rapidly being suspended. But some are trying to find ways around that. And you can see here a little petrol pump symbol with HK sit next to it, and that's a sort of a way of people saying, you know, let's keep this up, add fuel to the fire, if you like. Other comments on Weibo that have been censored. Some people saying everyone should climb out of the wall and see what's happening in Hong Kong. That's referring to China's Great Firewall that blocks a number of foreign websites. And I'll show you some tweets of, I think, Chinese people using VPNs and commenting on Twitter in a moment. Yeah. But first off, this is in Global Times, an editorial, I suppose, very much a government mouthpiece, and it is titled "Hong Kong's Overall Situation. China, it won't be shaken by opposition groups colluding with the West." So this is very much talking about collusion.
It's your fault, James.
Exactly. It's talking about how the numbers are being hyped, and essentially the rally was fueled by foreign interference. Taking a look at what's happening on what's being said on Twitter. Now, this is the Premier of Taiwan, and she is saying, we stand with all freedom-loving people of Hong Kong. In their faces, we see the longing of freedom and a reminder that Taiwan's hard-earned democracy must be guarded and renewed by every generation. As long as I'm president, one country, two systems will never be an option. This is a comment by somebody you'll be familiar with, yes. Francois, formerly of France 24 and now Hong Kong-based journalist Oliver Farry. He's commenting on that tweet by Taiwan's premier saying, "Not for the first time, Hong Kongers find that Taiwan's leaders are looking out for them far more than their own are." I suppose that's one way of talking about how this extradition bill is being viewed by many in Hong Kong as, I suppose, maybe a betrayal of sorts. This is a screen grab of a British UK paper, The Independent, talking about a Chinese writer who has been jailed for 10 years because of a gay erotic novel he wrote. And this Hong Kong-based Twitter user, Hong Kong Hermit, is being ironic about this, saying, well, China's attitude is saying, don't worry, this extradition law would only be for very serious crimes with sentences for more than 7 years in jail, which, of course, could amount to the sentence you could get for writing an erotic novel, right? So that's a source for worry, I suppose. And that tweet led to quite a few comments. Liu Xiaobao, the now deceased Chinese writer, after Liu Xiaobao was imprisoned for years for having signed a petition calling for democracy, this does nothing to reassure anybody. I'll finish with this comment by British-based Chinese-born writer Ma Jian. At the Hong Kong Literary Festival in November, a friend accompanied me at all times for fear I'd be secretly kidnapped and smuggled to China. If this extradition law passes, any critic of Xi's regime could be legally, openly abducted. I guess that's the great fear.
Right. That's exactly what I was saying, yeah.
You were saying?
That was exactly what I was saying about the bookstore people.
The booksellers. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you, Hong Kong.